Trees and roses, smiles in my eyes, and kisses in the air. I see it all, I see it all. I see it all, I see it all. Sun is shining, dreams come real. I see it all. Tell me why not, is true or not. I'm flying on the blue. Sun is shining, love comes quickly. I see it all. Today can be fantastic, living in a paradise.
República Dominicana, a tropical paradise. I remember when I used to believe everything I saw on TV. On the surface, the Dominican Republic appears to be a beautiful country, full of elaborate resorts, expansive golf courses, and smiling mulatto locals. But you don't have to deter far from the hotel boundaries to find the devil behind the mirror. Beyond the walls surrounding the tourist district, we find communities decimated by disease, prostitution, and poverty. That's me. That's Wartburg religion professor Judith Jones. We'll talk to her later. In 2009, I, along with a group of fellow classmates from Wartburg College, all of them, traveled beyond the tourist district to live with a host family and see the real conditions of the country up close and personal. After 2 weeks of growing close to the family and witnessing the resilience of the Dominican people, I knew I had to return, in hopes of documenting what I'd learned in an attempt to spread awareness of what was really going on there. Oftentimes the first question that we, the dare I say spoiled country that we are, ask is how did they end up in this situation? Well, the history of the Dominican Republic is a little complicated to say the least. I took the liberty of drawing a diagram in order to help explain it to you. Okay, maybe this is a little less helpful than I thought. Let's just go back to the beginning. The history of the Dominican Republic begins similar to many other countries, with Columbus stumbling upon its shore in 1492. Upon their arrival, the Spaniards found roughly 1 million Indians that made up the Taino tribe, but after less than a century, their population was almost completely wiped out by diseases brought by the settlers. The Spaniards then brought in African slaves, and forced them to work the fields for the next 300 years. After the land became a little less prosperous, they handed over the island to the French in 1775. But after a revolt by the Haitian people 6 years later, the French lost control. Over the next 43 years, ownership of the island was passed back and forth between the Haitians, French, and Spanish 5 times until the Dominican Republic was finally established in 1844 as a province of Spain. This brings us to the part of the Dominican Republic where the U.S. got involved, which tends to be a little different depending on where you got your information. To learn something I couldn't already find on Wikipedia, I sat down with Judith Jones, a religion professor at Wartburg College, who has visited the Dominican on numerous occasions and is well versed in their history and culture.
Okay, so what happened was that the U.S. assumed control of the country and ruled it for quite some time, simply took over everything, managed the financial institutions, had a military presence in the Dominican Republic, and controlled things. And you'll read histories that will say, and everything just turned out well, the economy stabilized, there was the advent of democracy, and really paint a very rosy picture. That doesn't necessarily agree with the experience of the Dominican people themselves. What did happen after the U.S. left was that a dictator named Trujillo took control of the country. And Trujillo came to power during the period when, or came to a position of great influence during the period when the U.S. had control of the country, He came up within the military forces that the U.S. trained and became a general. And from there, after the U.S. left, was able to assume the position of president and run the country as his own personal fiefdom.
With U.S. support, Trujillo ruled over the country with an iron fist for the next 31 years, personally owning most of the country's largest resources and most productive agricultural land. During his reign, Trujillo committed many violent and heartless acts, notably the massacre of 17,000 unarmed Haitian men, women, and children near the border. This, along with his attempted assassination of the Venezuelan president, led to his own assassination in 1961. As a result, his vice president, Joaquin Balaguer, took control. He ruled off and on for 45 years, thanks to his winning of numerous rigged elections. He was notorious for his terrible treatment of sugarcane workers, the Dominicans' main export at the time, making them work terrible conditions for pennies a day. He finally stepped down in 1996 at the age of 90 in an attempt to avoid a major outbreak of violence and rebellion. Edmundo de Souza, one of the first indigenous Dominican priests to be ordained in the Episcopal Church, worked in the Dominican and Haiti, and is now a pastor in Hudson Valley, New York. He lived through the reigns of Trujillo and Balaguer, and was willing to give us a first-hand account of what it was like.
Right. Under Trujillo's dictatorship, the thing was very, very harsh, and there was really no freedom. But Trujillo was a very organized person in his, he was a statesman. Balaguer had much more education than Trujillo, but a very bad president in the sense that he left everything loose, and he was as tough as Trujillo, getting people out of his way.
Leonel Fernandez was then brought to power in a fair election and has governed over the Dominican Republic for the majority of the years since. So that brings us to the current-day Dominican Republic, a country with 31% of the urban and 45% of the rural population living below the national poverty line. A place where citizens work in sweatshop conditions for less than $1 an hour and are still expected to pay for bills and groceries that are equal to, if not more costly in the U.S. A country where mothers are practically forced into prostitution in order to feed their children.
But what can I do? I'm just one person, not to mention a starving college student at that. Yeah, I could bring some old t-shirts I don't wear anymore and donate those, but how big of a dent is that really going to make? I realized after my last trip that the biggest impact I could have is by spreading awareness, not only of the situation in the Dominican Republic, but also how we as Americans can help. That's where this group comes in. 2 years after my first trip, I'm returning with a whole new crew. That's me and Judith again. And this is Kaylee, our main translator. And there's Brennan and Sarah and Meredith and Emily. Tomorrow we'll be flying from our humble homes in Iowa to the infinitely more humble homes of the Dominican Republic. And that is where the real story begins.
Our first day, not surprisingly, consisted of a lot of travel. Leaving early in the morning, we began our 5-hour drive to the Chicago O'Hare Airport. After a minor holdup at security, probably because I filmed this lady, we headed to our gate. Because, as I mentioned before, we are starving college students, we had to get a connecting flight through the JFK Airport in New York. At JFK, we had the pleasure of sleeping in the terminal while waiting for our flight the next morning. This gave me plenty of time to attempt to figure out why an airline would send a flight from Chicago to the Dominican Republic through New York first. While there are countless obscure reasons why the airline might choose to double our travel time, I realized it was likely due to the heavy Dominican population in New York City. With over 8% of the NYC population being made up of Dominican descent, the state by far has the most traffic coming and going to and from the Dominican. With that crucial mystery solved, it was time to join the girls at an appropriate distance and get some sleep. After getting some rest, or lack thereof, we arose to board our 7 a.m. flight to Santo Domingo. After making it through customs, baggage claim left no doubt that we had arrived in a different country. That is to say, we stuck out like sore thumbs. Despite the fact that the Dominican Republic has become a popular tourist destination, white folk like us still tend to draw a lot of attention. Once we met up with our host mom, Ariadna, who insists that she's our Dominican mother, we precariously pack the back of a truck and head to their home in San Pedro de Macorís. Along the way, we get some good looks at communities, as well as the reckless driving style the country seems to hold so dear. To compare this drive to the one we took a mere day before reveals some astounding differences. Once we arrive at the house and greet the other family members, we settle down for lunch, which in the Dominican is by far the biggest meal of the day. The table is set with plentiful amounts of rice, beans, chicken, and plantains. If you've never seen them before, I know they look like bananas, but they taste completely different. These foods are all very typical of the Dominican diet and tend to be served day after day, being prepared in different styles. After lunch, our group retires to their rooms to try to catch up on some sleep. After a short nap, I sneak out of the house with Dominguito and Manuel, Ariadna's two sons. We head down to the waterfront, and Manuel, who is 16, buys us all a round of beers. After day 2, life is good.